You're on, John.
Well, welcome to Unity of Springfield, Adult Education on World Religions and New Thought Christianity. My name is John Braucher, and I'm going to be presenting Self-Compassion Part 1. And I say Part 1, on January 19th, I'm going to do Part 2. And the way that I would like to, I have handouts here. And for those of you that take part, and of course, any of those that are watching this on live stream or afterwards, I'll make these handouts available at the office with Lisa, so that you can either pick them up or email. And they have some exercises embedded in the handout. And so the purpose is to kind of do a little bit of a self-compassion practice over a period of time, and then just kind of see what comes up. And it can be journaling, or it could be for those who aren't really good at doing that on a regular basis. It can be in thought, things kept in mind. So however you would like to do it, but I found it to be really helpful. Okay.
I can pass it out.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know where you're going to sit.
Way close.
Okay.
Can't miss much up front.
That's correct.
Sorry about
Happy birthday. Handouts?
Oh, I did.
Oh,
Yeah, did you want two of them?
No, we don't.
Okay.
So just go ahead and kind of relax, get centered, because self-compassion, at least the way that I like to relate to it, is a mindfulness type of a practice. And mindfulness is embedded within the practice. And this morning I got, I checked in on Facebook, I get these things that came back. Well, 5 years ago, this is a post that I posted. When you are compassionate with yourself, you trust in your soul, which you let guide your life. The soul knows the geography of your destiny better than you do. When people begin to practice self-compassion, they soon recognize that it is more than meets the eye. Learning to be kinder to ourselves has demonstrated multiple benefits on health and well-being, and creates the internal conditions for greater peace of mind and overall quality.
You were wise then too,
And I posted this. I shamelessly borrowed from the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. So, and this is what I'm presenting is based on the research and writings of Dr. Christian Neff. She's a psychologist who was exposed to Buddhism early in her professional career, during her education, and so ran into this whole concept of mindful self-compassion, and she turned it into one of the third, fourth generations of cognitive behavioral therapy. So she has these the mindful self-compassion workbook, which I'm not going to use for this talk, but I've used it before, and then just her seminal work, which was just self-compassion by Kristen. And she has some other books that she's written. And she writes, the kind of compulsive concern with I, me, mine, isn't the same as loving ourselves. Loving ourselves points to capacities, resilience, compassion, and understanding that are simply part of being alive. That's by Sharon Salzberg. She wrote a book called The Force of Kindness. She's another Buddhist psychologist. So again, as I present this, there's several pages, so I'm going to move kind of quickly through some of the content with the idea, and I have all of the exercises already written down on your handouts. And those again online or who are watching this, I'll make these available to Lisa in the office. And just if there's any of the exercises that speak to you, go ahead and practice them over the next few weeks, and then we'll revisit it January the 19th, where more discussion can be really a part of it. We can also have some discussion this morning, but I am going to move fairly quickly through this information so we can get it done in the time allotted. So we're going to start with some about kind of what's underlying why self-compassion is even something that we would want to do, need to do. Also, some of what seems to work, and there's two really basic, the crux, all you hear is just this first couple minutes. The crux is, number one, working with the silent critic, calming down that silent critic. And number two, actually taking action to be kind to yourself. Whether it's overt action that can be observed by others, or covert action being in the thoughts that we tell ourselves, and things that we say to ourselves. So it could be, again, either actual overt behaviors or covert behaviors. But either way, actions that we take out of kindness. And I think one of the benefits is that when we're kind to ourselves, we're also kind to others. And there's this ripple effect that goes out into the universe. And I think this, how we can really find peace on this earth. Not just within ourselves, but for her. The cost of self-judgment. She writes, continually feeding ourselves with positive self-evaluation is a bit like stuffing ourselves with candy. We get a brief sugar high, then a crash, feeling special to shame. It's not surprising that we hide the truth from ourselves when honesty is met with such harsh condemnation. Even if we do manage to get our act together, the goalposts for what counts as good enough seem out of reach. We must be smart, and fit, and fashionable, and interesting, successful, and sexy, and spiritual too. And no matter how well we do, someone else always seems to do better. And that you may recognize some internal dialogue, critic stuff in there in some. And there's another way to stop judging and evaluating ourselves altogether. Just stop labeling ourselves as good or bad and accept ourselves with an open heart. You mean you're actually allowed to be nice to yourself, to have compassion for yourself when you mess up or going to through a really hard time? I don't know. If I'm too self-compassionate, won't I just be lazy and selfish? And I slowly came to realize that self-criticism, despite being socially sanctioned, was not at all helpful. In fact, it only made things worse. I wasn't making myself a better person by beating myself up all the time. Instead, I was causing myself to feel inadequate and insecure, then taking out my frustration on the people closest to me. More than that, I wasn't owning up to many things because I was afraid of the self-hate that would follow if I admitted the truth. And then there's the compassion for others, which is where we first learn about compassion. Because compassion itself is that meaning is about caring for others who are in need. And the example that she uses here is there, but for the grace of God, go I. If I'd been born in different circumstances, or maybe just have been unlucky, I might also be struggling to survive like that person. We're all vulnerable. Compassion then involves the recognition and clear seeing of suffering. It also involves feelings of kindness for people who are suffering, so that the desire to help, to ameliorate suffering emerges. Recognizing our shared human condition, flawed and fragile as it is. And then, and most people can really relate to compassion for other people. In my work, when I was working, what I over and over and over heard was I can be compassionate to other people, but I can't do that with myself. And it's a very much of a struggle, and yet I think it's just critical, because when we're judging ourselves harshly, it's really difficult not to then do so to other people, even though we find it easier to do something with other people. But when you're getting beat up, sometimes you're going to fight back. And when it's you doing beating up, it's really hard not to fight back in certain situations. So compassion for ourselves, we first stop to recognize our own suffering in the face of the Western stiff upper lip tradition. Human beings by nature want happiness and do not want suffering. With that feeling, everyone tries to achieve happiness and tries to get rid of suffering. Everyone has the right to do this. From the lips of the Dalai Lama. And then another quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're all endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. From the Declaration of Independence. And so we don't have to earn the right to compassion, is what the forefathers of our country saw. That it's a birth. We're all deserving. So exercise 1. And again, you can do this just being mindful of it. Is what do you judge yourself for? What language do you use with yourself? Do you use insults? Are you kind? How do you think you would feel if you truly accepted yourself as you are? And what are the consequences of those thoughts on your motivation, your energy, your mood? And does the possibility scare you or give you hope, or both, if you are truly, fully accepting of yourself just as you are in this current moment? How do you typically react to life's difficulties? How do you treat yourself? Do you ignore the suffering and immediately go into fix mode? Do you get carried away by the drama of difficult situations or keep a balanced perspective? And this is a theme that will continue through this, is to not make a mountain out of a molehill, but also don't diminish it as if it doesn't exist. Somehow that middle road of accepting that it is your response, but be able to take that step back so that you can then choose, what do you want to do with it? How do you want to be tender and kind with yourself? And be honest and really feel the feeling. Exercise 2, think of an issue that tends to make you feel inadequate about yourself. And again, this will go into the last exercise as well, except in the last exercise, it's more of a journaling exercise, but the content's fairly similar. So think of an issue that tends to make you feel inadequate about yourself, feelings and emotions that come up. Try to be as emotionally honest as possible and avoid repressing negative feelings while you're not being melodramatic. Just feel your emotions exactly as they are, no more, no less. Now think about an imaginary friend who is unconditionally loving, accepting, kind, and compassionate. And what would this friend say to you? And write a letter from this perspective, imaginary friend, infused with a strong sense of acceptance, caring, kindness, and desire for your health and happiness. Feel that compassion soothing and comforting you. The love, connection, and acceptance of your birthright to claim you need only to look within yourself. So it's just an exercise. Again, this is something you can do at home, and to kind of get a base on this, and to get in touch with that part of you that's already there. I mean, you've already experienced it from time to time because you're here. We couldn't survive if we didn't have this to some extent. But it's more about a matter of kind of honing those skills, making them more accessible, easier accessible to ourselves, so that we don't go quite through so many ups and downs on the rocky road, experiencing whatever it is we're going. So ending the madness, what is the self inside us, this silent observer, severe and speechless critic who can terrorize us and urge us on to futile activity, and in the end judge us still more severely for the errors into which his own reproaches drove us? By T.S. Eliot. We vacillate between self-serving distortion and ruthless self-criticism in an effort to feel safe. Because human beings tend to live in hierarchical social groups. Those who are dominant within the groups are less likely to be rejected and have more access to valued resources. We can't take the risk of being outcast by people who keep us out of harm's way. Surely this behavior need not be judged. So the whole point of that is that this critic, internal critic, is part of our survival mechanism. And so we don't need to judge our judgment. The fact that we judge is human. When we pile on, it's not very helpful. But the fact that we do it is very human, and it's part of our survival mechanism. Because people who were in power get resources and have access to resources. And you have, and if you are somehow being really negative to those people in power, you can lose access to necessary survival resources. So the need to feel better than others. So in Lake Wobegon, all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. And the fact is that there's something psychologists have studied called the Lake Wobegon effect. And what they found was that 85% of students think they're above average in getting along with others. 94% of college faculty believe they're better instructors than their peers. 90% of drivers think they're more skilled than their road mates. It's just the way we think. You know, we have this idea that we're, that we're competent. And these kinds of thoughts help to store up this sense of competence. Otherwise, we'd be possibly very anxious about teaching or driving or socially interacting with others if we didn't have this maybe artificial self-confidence building up with it. It's hard to say, I don't know. Because we do have this inner critic, which is a part of our survival mechanism. So it's kind of a balance off of it. And again, we don't need to judge it, but it's helpful to be aware that it exists. Okay? And it's one thing to think it, it's another thing to tell it to other people. And it's one thing to think it and go, oh, that's, and call it what it is, than to necessarily act on it. So, also, Mean Girls. Anybody ever seen that movie?
I don't think I saw it.
Which one?
Mean Girls. It was kind of a cult classic. But one of the things is that the real popular girls who were wealthier and had all the really nice clothes and fast cars, they kept a book of something negative about all the other people. And in the movie, someone gets a hold of it and publishes it. And it turns into a whole big thing. But the point is that this was a power move by these people to collect negative things about others.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I get it.
It would be nice if we even knew that we were thinking things like that. It sounds like we recently in this book study that we did, we went to the book study, we shared personal information about who we are. And some of you know I have a background that's pretty rough. And so when I was like, when we got to it, I told my background. And I said, mine's like anybody else's. We all have our stuff. And, and I just said it like I always would say. I got home and there was this show that you watch that's about horrible 911 calls. And all I wanted to do was watch it. And I didn't want Don to say anything about me watching it because it was that horrible, murderous, horrible things. And I wanted him to leave me alone. And I just wanted to watch it. And I felt so good watching that show. And I was like, okay, what is this? What's going on? What's going on? I felt more comfortable and more at home with those horrible people that have horrible things happen to them. I felt so out of place in that group. And I didn't even realize, so I started listening to what was in my head. And what I would hear is, why are we even going to that stupid group? Brene Brown didn't get to go to the prom. Well, boo-hoo. She didn't get to go to the prom. She wasn't raped. She wasn't beat. She wasn't, And these stupid people that talk about their problems. And I'm listening to my own head. And I'm going, wow, where did that come? And I didn't even realize I had held so much contempt for people that have their problems. You know, so sometimes it really is, we don't even know.
Mhm.
We think that we're thinking one way and we really are feeling that way.
Right. And it is helpful to have that awareness in order to know where we are, so we can make good choices from going forward. And this again, this goes into, so why is it so hard to stop beating up on ourselves? Okay, and it serves as a submissive behavior because it allows us to abase ourselves before imaginary others who would pronounce judgment over us, then reward our submission with a few crumbs from the table. Again, this is from this whole survival piece, that if we're not at the top of the power grid, power triangle, or power pyramid, then we have this natural inclination, this survival instinct that has served, that, you know, we've gotten here in evolution to submit to those more powerful than us, so we can be available to some resource so we can survive. Also, the role of parents is involved. We deeply internalize our parents' criticisms. Phyllis Diller says, we spend the first 12 months of our children's lives teaching them to walk and talk, and the next 12 months telling them to sit down and shut up. And it's true. One of the first things that we learn is the word no, and we get in trouble for it right off the bat. Our parents don't like it so much, but it's an easy word to learn. And highly effective, very powerful. And one that we shouldn't forget. It's really important in self-compassion to be able to say, yeah, no. The way out is to understand and have compassion for self-criticism and replace it with a kinder response. Recognize that the weakness and imperfection are part of the shared human experience. And even if it feels like it's just you, everyone is experiencing the self-criticism on their own terms, in their own words, in their own experience. It's as universal as grief. It just exists. Even people who seem to be self-actualized are, you just can't totally erase it. It's gonna be there. It's just a part of the human experience. So letting go of the need to feel better than others, as we see through self-serving distortions that inflate our own ego at others' expense, is also helpful. So exercise 2 is a Gestalt empty chair technique. So basically, you get into a room, you have 3 chairs. And this is something that you just do on your own. You don't need anybody else. And one of the chairs you identify as the criticizer. And when you sit in that chair, you let that internal criticizer go, and you just let it run its course. Let it say what it's going to say. When you're in the criticized chair, second chair is the criticized chair, you're listening to this. You're the taker of the criticism. And so you're tending to your responses. You're listening to your responses. What does it feel like to be criticized? And then the third chair is the compassionate observer. the role that translates the criticism into how might it be more effective if you did some things differently in a kind way. How can that information that the criticizer was putting out, which is again it has a self-serving part to it. It's part of that survival mechanism. So there might be a grain of truth that could be helpful, or it could be just totally full of crap that you don't know until you get this compassionate observer, this non-judgmental look at, well, what is the criticizer saying? Is there a grain of truth that might be helpful? Or does it just need to be totally dismissed? And if there is a grain of truth, how can it be portrayed, or how can it be communicated to yourself in a way that's less demeaning, that's more respectful? So that's that. And then you go ahead and you spend some time in each chair and you look at from each perspective what's going on with whatever this self-critical issue is, or this issue that you don't feel good about. And it could be really anything. It could be relational, it could be something that has to do with a skill or a lack of a skill, or everything from financial management to driving, whatever.
How does this third chair, compassionate chair, how does that relate to the application of Jesus' admonition, judge not lest you be judged? It seems to me like Jesus wants us to stay in that chair, to stay in that non-judgmental chair, in spite of the fact that what you're saying is it's not really a natural thing to do.
Right. Well, yeah, obviously it would be easier if we stayed in that non-judgmental chair, which the Lord's Prayer, Sermon on the Mount, clearly dictates that that's. But I think that we're not always in that state of mind. So the reality is that we co-vary. He also said, and this is later on in his talk, but he said, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, and then Father forgive them, for they know not what they do. And which are also kind of getting to that same point of, that obviously when you're aware that you're judging. I used to have this handout when I was working. It said, it talked about being non-judgmental, and right after that is don't judge your judgment. So, because we're going to judge. Again, we're hard-wired. So we're going to judge. So the issue is just let ourselves, be aware, feel that kind of, oh, that was a judgment. That was just an opinion. Not really a fact, that was an opinion. And when you judge, then be able to take that step back and go, okay, does it hold water? Is it hurtful? Is it useful? Is it true? You go down these list of criteria of whether or not you want to act on that judgment, or and it gives you a power, a superpower, really, to choose how you're going to respond to the situation, to what's happening. So the core components of self-compassion: self-kindness, awareness of our interconnectedness, and mindfulness. So being kind to ourselves, quote from Pema Chodron: when you begin to touch your heart, or let your heart be touched, you begin to discover that it's bottomless, that it doesn't have any resolution, that this heart is huge, vast, limitless. You begin to discover how much warmth and gentleness is there, as well as how much space. I love that. I can feel the spaciousness. And self-kindness involves more than just stopping self-judgment. It involves actively comforting ourselves. And is just like the survival, fight or flight instinct is evolutionary, part of our inheritance, so is the tend and befriend instinct. And this desire to help others. And a part of that is the hormone oxytocin. It's the hormone of love and bonding. It occurs at the culmination of childbirth in huge amounts, and breastfeeding, as well as any kind of a tender physical touch. So the exercise that Dr. Neff encourages, well, one of them is just a self-hook. Just this sense of something that you don't have to depend on anybody else, whether or not you get it. And it might seem a little strange, and it might feel a little weird at first. But there's also in trauma treatment, in EMDR, there's something called the butterfly hug, which is very similar. And there's a lot of research on the benefit of it, the calming influence that it has. It's just biological. The other one to do is just to gently caress your forearm while saying something in your mind's ear that's supportive and positive. Has a similar effect, and is something that's not difficult to do. So it's something we can practice and over time get better at. And then there's something called anchoring, and Sue talked about it last week, where you can practice something in a certain situation, breathing in a certain way, sitting in a certain chair, where, or just doing a simple, a little behavior. And so that when you anchor, if you practice the oxytocin producing behavior and pair it with another easy behavior that you could do in a social situation, you can have access to this feel-good biological hormone and get recentered at any time that you choose. So that's something that we always have access to if we put some work into the practice of having the skills so that we make it accessible to ourselves. Exercise 2 is to journal, speak out loud, or think silently, but notice when you are self-critical. A lot of it goes on unnoticed, and when it's unnoticed, it just keeps on plowing through, and we're going, God, why do I feel anxious? Why do I, why am I down on myself? Or why can't I do anything right? And you're actively involved in it, but don't realize that it's something that you actually can choose to whether or not you do it or not. And make an active effort to soften the self-critical, and then reframe the observations made by the inner critic. And again, that we're using those same roles as the empty chair thing. The concept of being that we're all in this together, that there's an interconnectedness, is also one of the key parts of self-compassion. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Albert Einstein wrote that. And that's pretty key. Compassion by definition is relational. Literally means to suffer with, which implies a basic mutuality in the experience of suffering. Isolation and disconnection includes feeling unworthy. Feeling unworthy goes hand in hand with feeling separate from others, separate from life. Like a vicious cycle that the more deficient we feel, the more separate and vulnerable we feel. So it can really be a cycle that is very difficult to get out of once you get stuck in it. And that was from Tara Braucher, who's another one of these third, fourth generation therapists, psychologists. The comparison game, in order to perceive ourselves as special and above average, we routinely engage in an egoistic process of social comparison with others. And take it to the next level, there can be the illusion of perfection, not allowing for the inevitable failures that come with striving to achieve and setting high standards. Imperfection makes growth and learning possible. So there she's getting at this. Some people, I happen to not really have ever experienced it. But some people are kind of perfectionists and really feel a lot of pain and discomfort if when they do something it doesn't work out perfectly. I really don't know what that's like, but it must be, when I talk to people, it must be very painful for them. And in order to deal with feelings of isolation and disconnection, the whole thing about interconnection is really critical. That it's not just us. And everybody shares the level of imperfection. We bounce around in this world and learn and we make mistakes, which gives us information through which we can grow and learn. And none of us have been able to learn mistake-free. I mean, it just doesn't exist. And I like the thing that from Thich Nhat Hanh, this paper, it's got a cloud in it. Because without the cloud, there'd be no rain. Without the rain, there'd be no tree. Without the trees, there would be no paper for this to be written. So I see the cloud in the paper. And I see that in you.
So, when you're talking about compassion, joining someone in suffering, or looking at the world and seeing that all of it has problems, I tried that for a lot of years and then had to go to a lot of codependent meetings in order to be healed from that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, a better way to look at it is I see the highest in you. I see who you really are. And I see that this wonderful game that we've come to play is important. This mix it up, all kinds of contrast game is really important. And it's okay what you're creating right now. And it's okay what I'm creating right now. And when I come from that place, then I have something to offer this world instead of needing to be helped and fixed or needing to help and fix. And anyway.
And I agree with you. And it's the point really is that we're not any different from each other. That we all experience pain, discomfort, and we all have compassion. So, and we all have that. We all understand. We all have imperfections, and we all have a higher self. And
Doesn't that come back to the idea that it's not a good idea to compare ourselves with anybody, because we can always find someone who's not as good as we are about that, or someone who's superior to us. And what difference does it make? We're someplace on the scale, on every scale you could possibly imagine. There's always somebody better. There's always somebody worse.
correct. And yet, those thoughts go through our mind.
No. Nobody said.
And so, as they go through our mind, we can just acknowledge their place and their relative value. So, and again, this is all still geared towards, okay, how do we treat ourselves? So, I think it ends up having an effect on how we treat other people. But for this purposes of this, it's really, we want to be aware of this interconnectedness to let ourselves off. So we're more kind to ourselves. Where we see that shared humanity.
Another thing that occurs to me that the golden rule works in reverse.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's, to me, that is confirming. That confirms its value.
Yes. It's bi-directional. The illusion of being in total control is just that, an illusion. Therefore, judging ourselves or others fails to account for factors we either have no control of or no knowledge of. The act of judging loses out when it's looked at critically. It just doesn't. It makes no sense. It's totally illusory. It's not real. And as I have heard repeated, and I've repeated it, that opinions are the lowest form of thought. And judgment is one of those. It fits into the category of an opinion. And again, Jesus goes on to write about let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And later, while hanging on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And as Don shared the Sermon on the Mount, that's in the Lord's Prayer about judge as you judge. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people lose, just because of the way we look at life. They don't see the real meaning of what Christ was saying on the cross. He wasn't forgiving them for what they were doing to him. He was asking for the forgiveness, because whenever they came to the light of who they were, they would then have to know what they did to him. And he asked for that forgiveness for them, so that they could look at it. Wow, how could I have been so insane?
And what I like about that, what you just brought up, is it really further drives home the point that it's an inside job. He can't do it for you, as many people believe. The forgiveness piece is an inside job for each of us.
When we're on the other side, there's nothing to forgive, because nobody did anything wrong. The structure of all is both positive and negative. And it is only us construing it to be something that is wrong.
Well, even the positive and negative is really a human construct of duality.
Don and I were having a discussion last night about the difference between personal truth and the capital T truth. And really, the more we discussed it, the more it was like, I don't think there's a difference. The things that I see as the capital T truth, God truth, the truth that is for everybody. I don't know that I can have anything that is not my personal interpretation and personal judgment. And when I look at it that way, then I don't go, oh, well, they should behave this way because this is the real truth. And I can be more compassionate with everybody.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good example of this concept. Thank you. So the last couple pages of the handouts are just some more exercises. I'll briefly go over these. The exercise for letting go of our self-definitions by identifying our interconnectedness. So this is a practice. First of all, think about a trait that you judge yourself for, and that it's important for your self-definition. In other words, this is a trait that occurs often enough that you go, well, I'm kind of ADHD, or I'm kind of, whatever it is that you have that you say about yourself frequently enough that it's something I kind of identify with. And I put things off to the last minute, or this, and so it's something that you relate to as being a trait in yourself. And then you go ahead and you dig into it a little bit, and you ask yourself, how do you display this trait? Who are you when you don't display this trait? And are you still you? And what are there particular circumstances that seem to draw this trait out? And are there other circumstances where this trait doesn't show itself? So if you're kind of ADHD, but there's certain situations where you focus really well. What's going on? And are you still you if you're in that situation where you don't exhibit that trait? And are you still you? And what are the various causes and conditions that led to having that trait in the first place? Were these outside forces, which could be genetics, family, history, other experiences, and so on and so forth, partly responsible? So are these outside forces partly responsible for the real inner you? And did you choose to have this trait? If not, why are you judging yourself for that trait. And what happens when you reframe your self-description so that you're not defining yourself in terms of that trait? So that trait really just becomes a situational behavior as opposed to self-defining as who you are. And how does that feel different? They use the example, if I'm an angry person versus sometimes in certain circumstances, I get angry. When a certain person does this, I get angry. Versus that I'm an angry person. Exercise on noting practice. So this one is separating the awareness. This is a mindfulness practice. So separating awareness and the content of your awareness, which is a meta awareness practice. So notice your thoughts and emotions as content. Notice that thoughts are thoughts and not necessarily facts, and how you feel about them and think about them when you think them. I'm aware of this thought and or physical or emotional response. And even when we get a bit carried away and are not mindful of the moment, you still have the opportunity to then mindfully examine that moment. And then go, oh, I just started to identify with something that isn't really, it's really just a thought or behavior or a condition. And go ahead and have that. Once you start practicing it, it's easier to just take that step back and go, oh, okay. It's that again.
I don't know about other people, but some of us who have had experiences or labels that we've tried to get rid of the label. So for me is multiple personality disorder. Okay. When I have tried to become normal and one and just like everybody else and try to say this is just this is not who I really am or has anything to do with me. I would imagine like someone who has ADHD or has that never ever worked. Matter of fact, it always made things worse. But when I can say, in this lifetime, I was this psyche in my head, how I was put together, was windy, has this element in it, and I can look at it as a detrimental thing, the same way an ADHD person can look at it, or I can find a way to make it work for me and be my strength. So now when I say that, I love the way I'm put together. My inner people share with me, and I get to know what's happening, and they have different perspectives, and I have a loving, wonderful community that I'm aware of and serves me, and I serve them. So see, it's not getting rid of it and saying I'm not it, but finding a way to live in have it be a wonderful aspect of yourself.
Just the way with ADHD, the ability to
multitask.
or even multitasking doesn't always work, but you can cover so many perspectives and look at things and have a level of creativity that cannot be found any other way. So everything's a double-edged sword and two sides of the dime. So Shinsen Young, Japanese Zen guy, says suffering is pain times resistance, and then couched it with saying, well, actually, it's exponential rather than a multiplicative relationship. the more we resist what is, the more suffering we experience. That pain's not the enemy. Pain's just a part of human existence. And when we resist it, and it can't be happening. It's not really. This really isn't happening, and of course it is. But we can look at it. We can look at it in many different ways, and that's where the ADHD comes from. So, an exercise for mindfully working with pain is the ice cube exercise, where you take an ice cube in one hand, and you notice how it feels, and you notice any of the discomfort, and you notice what level of discomfort that you experience, and you also notice how long it takes before you put it down, where you no longer want to do it. And then give yourself a minute or two, and then you take another ice cube of a similar size and you put it in your other hand. And you start off with making friends with the sensation. Looking at those sensations, describing them non-judgmentally, without putting a negative connotation to that experience, but really looking more at, is that a tingle, or does that feel kind of burning? Is that what, really getting into more content and description rather than judgment of the experience. And then again, note the level of discomfort and the length of time that you hold this ice cube. And that's basically it. And then just compare the two experiences. Again, in review, there's 3 doorways in for self-compassion. When you notice you're in pain, any kind of pain, you can give yourself kindness and care. You can choose a soft caress. You can choose a kind word to yourself. You can remind yourself, the second one, you can remind yourself that encountering pain is part of the shared human experience. You're not alone. Ever. And thirdly, you can hold your thoughts and emotions in mindful awareness. You can experience this meta experience of having a choice and how you encounter your experience. And the final exercise is the one that I hope that some of us over these next few weeks, until we meet on the 19th again, that we journal and write down something that we felt bad about, something you judged yourself for, or a difficult experience that caused us pain. And then using mindfulness as you write, to try to be accepting and not judgmental of your experience, not belittling and not over-dramatizing. Write down ways that your experience was connected to the larger human experience. Make that interconnectedness consciously. And then write yourself some kind of understanding words of comfort. And practicing these 3 components of self-compassion will help organize your thoughts and emotions, helping to encode them in your memory, so that this can become something that becomes like a habit. Just like our self-criticism is something that was encoded in us when we were young. We can choose to encode through practicing a behavior, to encode it another option to handling our response to discomfort. And as we maintain that, it just makes it easier to translate in that regular life. Oh, and we're run late. So let's see. I'll run through the announcements real quickly. Meditation is tonight at 6 p.m. and is open to everyone. Tomorrow evening, the grief support group will meet at 6 p.m. The holidays can be difficult for these encountering grief, and the group will meet Mondays at 6 p.m. We're meeting this tomorrow, but we won't be meeting the Monday after that, the 30th of December, right before New Year's. The church will be closed Christmas Eve and Christmas Day this week. The Christmas potluck will be at 1 p.m. on Christmas Day. This is open to the spiritual community and anyone else who would like to join us. Please sign in at the foyer so what food you plan to bring. If you can come a little early and help set up or clean up afterwards, that would be greatly appreciated. So it won't be totally closed. Next Sunday in the New Thought and World Religion Adult Education class, Paul Day will present the history and tradition of the New Year's resolution. Is that an experience on failure? Okay. Class begins at 9:15 a.m. Next Sunday during our celebration service, we will bid farewell to 2024 and gather in a moment of contemplation and intention setting for our annual Burning Bowl ceremony. The ritual allows us to release the old and make room for new blessings and experiences in the coming year. The Tuesday morning book group will not meet this week. They will meet next Tuesday, December 31st, and begin a new book, E Squared by Pam Graf. Everyone is welcome to it. In January, we'll be electing 3 new board members. If you have an interest, please pick up an application in the foyer. If you have any questions, please see Dee or Sue or any of our current board members. And that's a commitment, and yet it's a really a growth experience to be involved on the board, and the relationships that you forge are also really meaningful. Begin the new year with a clear vision and renewed sense of purpose at our annual White Stone ceremony. This ritual will take place at our celebration service on Sunday, January 5th. Our next Friendship Sunday potluck is January 5th, right after the service. Please sign up in the foyer with what type of dish you will bring. Join us for a transformative experience at our treasure mapping workshop on January 11th at 10 a.m. Sue will facilitate this workshop, and everyone will create a physical representation of their goals and dreams. And if you have any unwanted magazines, please bring them to donate. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Pleasure.